Who is to blame? Who is to blame? Who is to blame? Who is to blame? Hello. So, Dr. No, the first Bond film but adapted from the sixth Bond book. Bit of an odd choice, as Bond was already an established character by this point, and this book was actually intended as a shake-up of the formula. But there are only two locations, London and the Caribbean, and budget was tight, so I guess money won out in this case. As this is the very first Bond film, it's one of the closest adaptations of its parent book, although there are still some significant differences which we'll be talking about as we go along. We also see that some classic Bond images appear full-formed at the first sight, others don't appear yet, and some appear in this weird half-there form, like the title sequence for example. So we have the gun barrel and the theme, but it only starts after Bond fires. Until then we get these odd electronic beeps, and then we go straight from this to the opening sequence with no prelude. There's no big musical number here yet, just this elevator music, but we do see the silhouettes of the dancing girls have already appeared. In addition to this, the logo thrashes around bizarrely, which reminds me of the effect of a 60s supercomputer about to go mad and launch a nuclear holocaust. We then interestingly segue from three silhouettes in the title sequence to these three real figures in the film. These are the so-called three blind mice, Dr. No's assassin henchmen. In the film they're just ordinary black Caribbeans, whereas in the book they're described as Chigros or Chinese Negroes, half Chinese and half black Caribbean. Nowadays, of course, that term is highly politically incorrect, and the preferred one seems to be black Asian or Blasian. I don't know who thinks up all this mixed race terminology, but he really likes portmanteau. That's portmanteau with an X on the end. A silent X, because it's plural. We're then introduced to Strangways, the British agent who's on Dr. No's trail. However, he runs into the three blind mice and they kill both him and his assistant Miss Trueblood. I'm kind of surprised actually that they didn't try and imply that Strangways was Bond and then shock the audience by killing him. But I guess everyone already knew that Connery was playing Bond. Though it doesn't stop the director from giving us this pretty good intro scene with Bond playing cards, and at first we never see his face. Now, this doesn't happen in the book because that's a direct sequel to From Russia with Love, which confusingly was adapted as the second film. However, here it works well because it evokes the first Bond book, Casino Royale. Ah, hot potato, walking for skulls, plucked to make amends. I, of course, meant the book, not the film adaptation of that particular story, of course. We're also introduced to Sylvia Trench, Bond's recurring girlfriend character from the first two films. She was dropped from Goldfinger onwards, and I'm not surprised. I mean, what did they expect when Bond has a different girl in every film? She's also the first one to come up with the surname, first name, surname style of address, when she does it to Bond, and in our first glimpse of Connery, he actually mockingly repeats it back to her.
Trench. Sylvia Trench. I admire your luck, Mr.
Bond. James Bond.
So here is Connery as Bond, the first and in many people's eyes the best. Certainly he came out of nowhere to do the role and managed to win over even Ian Fleming, who originally thought him to be grossly unsuitable. He certainly manages to evoke a lot of the book description of Bond, as a character who is suave, cruel, often cynical, and yet still someone we sympathise with as a main character, which is absolutely vital. So Bond gets called in by M. Incidentally, Ian Fleming chose this letter to represent the head of the Special Intelligence Service as a reference to the real-life one, which is C, without actually giving away state secrets. Lawyer-friendly cameo! Yay, I've got the first one on my TV Tropes bingo card. We get the iconic, recurring Bond Moneypenny scene here fully formed as he throws his hat on the hat stand and then flirts with her before going in to see M. M tells Bond about Strangway's disappearance and explains that they suspect that Dr. No is using radio transmissions to intercept American missile tests. Now this is one of the biggest changes from the book, if everyone already knows why Dr. No is there and that he's intercepting American missile transmissions. In the book we only find this out towards the end, and the idea is that Dr. No is causing American missiles to crash and thus making them think they're malfunctioning when they're not, and force them to spend money on developing new... Fine, except if the Americans already know he's doing that, why is this affecting their programs, and furthermore, why haven't they just gone in with all guns blazing? Plot holes aside, M also says the Americans plan to orbit a rocket around the moon soon. Yes, do you remember when they were doing that? Or perhaps you don't, if you're like me and you were born after 1972, the year when the Americans and every other country decided that, on reflection, we're not going to go out into that great void of space to explore the destiny of humanity. No, we're just going to stay home and masturbate senselessly for thousands of years until an asteroid comes along and puts us out of our worthless, shameless, subhuman misery! And that is why all critics of manned spaceflight should be rendered down and turned to rocket fuel. Anyway. So then Major Boothroyd of Q Division, not yet the Q we all know and love, comes in and gives Bond a new gun, the Walther PPK. It's weird that they left this scene in word for word from the book, because the point there was that Bond's beloved Beretta added alliterative appeal! Yes! His Beretta had jammed, and he was then almost fatally poisoned by Rosa Klebb, which is something they also make an oblique reference to. In any case, it seems odd that Bond is so attached to his Beretta when this is the first time we've actually seen him in films, and in any case, film Bond would soon become synonymous with the Walther PPK. So Bond flies to Jamaica, and in what's probably an improvement over the book, immediately gets into the action when his driver turns out to be an agent of Dr. No. The fight is somewhat reminiscent of the Avengers, given that Bond is still wearing his hat and suit. The driver takes a cyanide capsule rather than be captured, and Bond drops him off at Government House with the first ever Bond one-liner.
Sergeant, make sure he doesn't get away.
When you watch this film, you have to remember that this is one of the very first examples of espionage being brought to the masses, so they will show things that we consider to be blindingly obvious but would have been great revelations back then. For example,
All frequencies are changed, immediately security is broken.
we also see Bond dust his case to show any tampering, order his iconic martini for the first time, speak to Strangway's card partners, and finally go off to meet Quarrel. I think this is the change from book to film that is best known. In the books, Live and Let Die came first, in which Bond first met Quarrel, and here he's just meeting up with him again and asking him to train him up to his usual standards, as he's been weakened by the fight with Rosa Klebb. Here, on the other hand, because Quarrel is a stranger, he and Bond have to have the obligatory allies tussling scene. Let's you and him fight! Yay! I've won! House!
Yes!
You, go back to being an upper-class twit. Now!
Well, huzzah and hurrah!
Turns out Quarrel's already working for the CIA, and Felix Leiter is there for no reason other than to persuade the American audience that it's safe for them to watch the film as it's got one of them in it. To be fair, they were originally going to make Thunderball first, and Leiter is in that. And it could be worse. I mean, the original American 1954 TV adaptation of Casino Royale, that one even made Bond an American. Why do they always have to remake everything with American actors set in America so it's safe for sanitised viewing by American audiences? I mean, Fawlty Towers, Red Dwarf, Coupling, one of them ruined by adaptations. It's not like we'd ever do that. Anyway, but enough rant. I'm not too sure this Felix Leiter was too reassuring to the Americans anyway. Where are you? I can't see through these glasses. He also says limeys can be touchy about trespassing. How times have changed. Nowadays, if you shoot a burglar, here you go to prison, and in America you get a bloody medal. So Dr. No's henchmen continue to try and bump off Bond. Miss Tarot, who hid all the files on Dr. No, tries to serve as a honey trap and then learns why that rarely works on Bond. Professor Dent, one of Strangway's card partners, also turns out to be one of Dr. No's men, and he goes to Dr. No's island, Crab Key, where the unseen doctor gives him a poisonous spider to try and kill Bond with. In the book, it was the more plausible but less scary looking Caribbean giant centipede.